I'm Brandon Duke. I'm a board member on the volunteer UCA board. I work on the social media subcommittee, which means I help curate the UCA Facebook group, where I have met many of you, and the YouTube channel, which also means I'm probably in the running. There's other people in the room that are in it too, but in the running for the world record for most times called a heretic by people I haven't met. Dr. Tuggy and some other people probably have me beat, but I wanted to share some of the wonderful feedback we get on the YouTube channel regarding this. Sometimes people are not as positive towards our content as I would like. My particular favorite is the phrase, "Praise be the triune God," which I don't find in my Bibles. Do you guys? I like that a lot. So when I'm not arguing with people online, I'm enjoying being married to my wife Melissa and our son Cole, who's 7, like I said. And when I have to, I play entrepreneur, running a little tech consulting business. It seems often my day job entails reminding boomers, no, click the other right button, not that right button. Because I spend a lot of time in discussions for the UCA, I often hear the following question. Here's our topic for tonight. Whether explicitly it's stated or it's implicit, what's the deal with the UCA? We get the Unitarian part, we get the Christian part, but what's up with the alliance part? Why is the UCA an alliance and not like a denomination or a federation or Unitarian Christian monarchy? Or I particularly, Unitarian Christian rebellion or revolution kind of has a feel for it, but those don't work, and here's why. Simply put, an alliance is the right tool because denominations already exist. A federation binds its members too tightly together. You sacrifice too much sovereignty to be able to have lots of people in good faith participate. A monarchy entails one-man rule, which doesn't work for us. We already have a king. And a rebellion doesn't have the end in mind. It's just has a limited objective of overturning the status quo. An alliance is the perfect tool for us, and tonight I'd like to explain why. I want to consider with you how alliances work, their strengths and weaknesses, what our strategy is, and what winning looks like. There are many examples we could turn to this. We could look to literature maybe to draw some lessons about alliances, maybe to Narnia or Lord of the Rings, an interesting alliance there. I guess I'd have to be one of those short guys. We could look at film and look at the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars. But I think fiction just doesn't cut it for our purposes. Tonight I want to focus on the practical, pragmatic, real-world, nitty-gritty elements of alliances. So I want to roll the clock back about 80 years. And I want to draw 6 lessons from the most famous alliance in the 21st century, the alliance between the United Kingdom, United States, and Soviet Union that managed to defeat Germany during World War II. And I want to apply those lessons to the UCA if I can. Tonight I'd like to help us step back and look at the big picture, envision the future and our part of it. A couple of caveats. My use of national military alliances is for purposes of analogy only. I am in no way advocating violence of any kind. That isn't a part of our movement. Neither am I saying that Trinitarians are equivalent to Nazis. Of course, those 2 caveats make sense, right? Because our opposition isn't persons, but ideas, falsehoods. We're in a war, if you will, with Trinitarianism, the theology, not Trinitarians, the persons. And so our weapons are not cannons or tanks, but communication and truth. Victory for us isn't about overcoming Trinitarians. It's about persuading them. So that said, let's go to our first lesson that I'd like to draw. First, alliances are foreseen by visionary leaders, and many of our leaders are here this weekend. For World War II, we had Churchill and Roosevelt that both saw World War II coming. Efforts to appease the Nazi regime had backfired and unfortunately instead communicated weakness by the rest of the world that led to further German aggression rather than creating the peace that was hoped for. The mobilization of German industry and its fighting-age men was obvious and threatening, and Churchill, when he became prime minister, immediately began lobbying Roosevelt for his support. Of his long-term effort to create the alliance with Roosevelt, Churchill once wrote, No lover ever studied every whim of his mistress as I did those of President Roosevelt. Churchill was one who knew how to woo people. Churchill recognized victory would require a focused effort in that regard, of alliance building with an assembly of nations that could together resist the Allied powers. In a speech in the summer of 1940, Churchill spoke to the House of Commons. Some people refer to it as their finest hour speech. And he said, "We shall go on and continue to assemble the group of united, determined, and heavily armed nations who have the will to persevere to the end, and who will be joined by others as time goes on, and who will never make parley or make peace with Hitler or his accomplice Mussolini." Roosevelt, for his part, also saw the need to support Britain as an ally, making speeches and moving legislation as he could as well, especially the Lend-Lease Act, which we'll talk about later, even though the rest of the country was solidly isolationist. In fact, he was breaking campaign promises to do so. He pursued the alliances at significant political risk to himself because he recognized the moral and practical urgency to do so. Shift of the frame to the more recent past. Anybody recognize these guys? If you haven't seen this video, check out the YouTube channel and get the backstory. Our own alliance emerged thanks to visionary leaders as well. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to start by taking you back in time to 2018. I was a baby Unitarian at the time, and I was attending my first ever Unitarian event, and as some of you are this weekend. That event changed my life because I met people like Dale Tuggy, Sean Finnegan, and Keegan Chandler for the first time in person. I was able to listen as they talked about the Unitarian movement, the needs of the many isolated Unitarians that had contacted them and looking for fellowship, and the dream of restoring to the rest of Christianity the truth about who God is and who Jesus is. That weekend I found not only the meaningful fellowship my heart craved, but something bigger than me, a mission and service to God. I'll never forget standing in a parking lot under a Georgia sky full of stars swatting at mosquitoes and listening to Dale and Keegan and Sean brainstorming about this initiative. Should it be a Unitarian coalition or maybe a Unitarian Christian Federation? No, an alliance, they concluded. We Unitarians were too few to have the impact we wanted separately. It would take a big tent to make the difference we want to make. And that's one of my points. Alliance building is an act ultimately of humility. It is done by visionary leaders who recognize the limits of what you can do alone, and it is an act of courage, taking the first step in absorbing the criticism of those who don't share the vision or that feel threatened by it. I found this quote from Groucho Marx, which I thought was funny. "I refuse to join any club that would have me as a member." We know people that take this view of our alliance. We're going to have to build our alliance without them. I think one of the major tasks, to quote this, of great leaders is to convert competition into alliances, and I fully agree with that. Lesson number 2, alliances are forced by a common foe. The common foe brings together participants that would have otherwise been unwilling to participate. This was the map of Europe at the height of the German expansion during World War II. There on the left. The gray areas, the dark areas, are German control. As you can see, much of the continent had been overrun by the German panzers, and the United Kingdom was only spared because of a narrow strip of water, the English Channel. German submarines were sinking shipping in the Atlantic and putting a stranglehold on England. Winston Churchill knew that without the support of allies, his nation would be starved into submission, if not invaded and just conquered outright. We face, I think, an analogous situation. The Trinitarian chokehold on Christianity is such that any dissenters are isolated, persecuted, and excluded. Trinitarian apologists appeal to tradition and to the supposed historical majority among Trinitarians to try to complete their conquest of the church. Just like England, those of us enjoying Unitarian fellowships occupy an isolated island right now of temporary security, while those of us that are in Trinitarian occupied territory face expulsion from Christian churches, exclusion from Christian schools and colleges, and fundamental separation from the rest of our Christian family. In fact, I even talked to a lady who could not get health insurance, be a part of a group health insurance for her child because it required her to sign a statement of belief, including the Trinity. To quote Benjamin Franklin, we're either all going to hang together or hang separately. All right, lesson 3. Alliances are forged by the heroic actions of a brave few. Think of Thermopylae, or in my case, I'd like to talk about the Battle of Britain. It's normal to start small and let people be inspired to join by example. At the time in 1940, the opponents of Germany weren't united. Some had capitulated already, like France. The USA was solidly isolationist, trying to avoid being drawn into the war, and Russia was cutting deals to avoid open conflict with Germany. The Unitarian movement in the 21st century has been small, geographically and organizationally fractured, sometimes inwardly focused, hunkering down to survive or detach from the larger effort to push back against the Trinitarian mainstream. There were those in the USA that wanted to aid the UK, including Roosevelt, but that aid in the form of the Lend-Lease Agreement and eventually the US entry of the war was not a reality in 1940. Likewise, the polling numbers for us show that half of Christians polled say they don't believe the Holy Spirit's a person, while 99% of them say they're Trinitarians. That math doesn't add, right? And roughly a third of them say Jesus isn't God. They're out there reading their Bibles, but they're oblivious to the conflict their Trinitarianism in name only creates with their common sense reading of Scripture. So, for a while, England had to stand alone against the German preparations for invasion. The Royal Air Force outnumbered 4-1. The Battle of Britain, between the underdog Royal Air Force and the German Luftwaffe, raged from July 1940 to October 1940 and were some of the most important months in recent history. And it was the courage, skill, and effectiveness of these small band of pilots, just a few hundred, that proved to the rest of the world that the Germans could be defeated. Churchill famously said of their impact and sacrifice, "Never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few." Look around you tonight. We too are a small band that must hold the line. For a while we must stand alone, an alliance that's small, outnumbered, but plucky. We have to win the battles in front of us to grow the movement and to carry the campaign to the next phase. More on the specifics of that later. But take away this: every last person in our alliance can make a difference and potentially change the arc of the future. Lesson 4, alliances are unfair and unequal, which means we all need to be prepared to sacrifice. By the spring of 1941, the Brits had won their defensive struggle in the Battle of Britain against the German Air Force and had bought time for the U.S. Lend-Lease program to begin. The economic might of the United States was being awakened, and all the materials of war were streaming across the planet from factories in the United States to the front lines of the war. This was significant, but even then, in the spring of 41, the U.S. and Russia weren't yet engaged in the fighting. But by the end of the war, Russia would have paid in blood to the count of over 10 million combat casualties to push the German army back to Berlin. The proximity of the 3 million man German army present on the Eastern Front and the inertia of the events brought about by Germany's choice to invade Russia meant no allied nation paid so dearly in lives, and no ally came even close. In parallel, by the end of the war, the United States would have paid in treasure over $50 billion in support. That's $719 billion in today's dollars, in assistance to over 30 countries, including 31 of those billions to the United Kingdom and 11 billion to Russia. It was an enormous volume of American trucks, planes, tanks, and supplies that carried the Red Army to Berlin, and historians are just now starting to really notice this and advocate for a better picture for us in the West of what happened during the war. In November 1941, Joseph Stalin wrote to President Roosevelt, "Mr. President, your choice to give this interest-free loan in the form of material supplies and raw materials has been accepted by the Soviet government with heartfelt gratitude as urgent aid to the Soviet Union in its enormous and difficult fight against our common enemy." And then in a dinner toast a few years later, Stalin went further and said, "The United States is a country of machines. Without use of those machines through Lend-Lease, we would have lost this, or we could lose this war." Forgive me. Nikita Khrushchev, years later, who led the Soviet Union from 53 to 64, agreed with Stalin's assessment. In his memoirs, Khrushchev described how Stalin stressed the value of the Lend-Lease aid. Quote, "Stalin stated bluntly that if the United States had not helped us, we would not have won the war." Each nation paid a unique and almost incomprehensible price in blood and treasure for Allied victory to be achieved. God willing, there's a day coming when the human and financial resources of the UCA will see a dramatic uptick, and as the snowball of the alliance building continues. And with that growth will come the ability to reach far more ears and make a far larger impact. As we work toward that goal, some allies may take the lead in one regard, other allies leading in another regard. At each stage, we'll be working and giving as we can. That effort will be inherently uneven. As some allied members and organizations will be better suited at one time or the other, and as new, hopefully larger groups join in, the burden may shift. And we need to be flexible and humble to contribute what we can, when we can, to the alliance and to support each other. Lesson 5. Alliances are difficult. They're temporary, but they're necessary. It's hard, but it's the only way. Churchill once said, "The only thing worse than having allies is not having them." Having allies is difficult. We have to reconcile our differing but compatible goals. We have to share resources. We have to resolve internal conflicts. Each alliance member has to keep their members on board with the program. We must be able to walk and chew gum, to build our churches, to advocate for a full slate of beliefs on one hand, and also to coordinate across those divides, to advance our common interest in Unitarian theology and networking. It means doing something as simple as keeping the big picture in mind when you interact on Facebook. It means enduring doctrinal differences so we can have group events like this one. It means putting your resources and support behind people and groups you disagree with on topics. It means being able to see more than just your sector of the battlefield. We cannot allow the difficulties inherent to our alliance to break the alliance. How many people here attend a Unitarian church? We just polled this. Okay, how many people are currently not attending a church? Okay, we can't allow that difference to break the alliance. How many people here would say they're biblical Unitarians? Okay, how many Arians? Okay, we can't allow that difference to break the alliance. And I could go on and on. Speaking in tongues, being observant to Torah, being protective of our privacy. We can't allow these divisions in our ideology to break the alliance. We must be able to work together across those boundary lines, and we do it by keeping lines of communication open if the alliance is going to succeed. Ford said that unless you're working together, it's not success. 6th lesson, alliances free people from oppressive hegemonies. Here's the payoff. They're a way to win as underdogs. In preparing for this talk, I did some background reading on the theory related to alliances, and it's quite interesting. It's a deep topic that's been covered by thinkers as diverse as Sun Tzu or Aristides or Karl von Clausewitz, and even anthropologists and sociologists like Claude Lévi-Strauss. And the record from historical alliances, like from our example of the Allies in World War II, leave us a deep well to draw from. But to summarize all that, and to put it simply, there's only one reason people form alliances, and that's to win a war, to win the peace, to win a better life. Alliances allow you to win when otherwise you would lose. Alliances can do what otherwise would be impossible, overcoming a stronger adversary. And that's the only reason powerful enough to push people to enter into them, because alliances are hard. You wouldn't endure them if the benefits weren't significant. If there's one takeaway you take from all this would be the phrase, alliances bring together parties that would otherwise not associate for a purpose they could not otherwise accomplish. That's why we're a Unitarian Christian alliance. We want to win the theological and social conflict with a Trinitarianism that's far more powerful than us in all measures but the truth. So what's our strategy? This weekend presents a perfect opportunity for all of us to come together in a conference of the allied powers, so to speak, and discuss strategy and to build our strength. Here's some suggestions from me for strategic principles for your consideration, and I hope we have time to work on this together going forward. First, hold the line while maintaining the moral high ground. Dr. Tuggy already talked about this. We must persist in working together while demonstrating our authenticity as true Christians by bearing good fruit in our lives and in our churches. Lest you misunderstand me tonight, let me be very clear. I am not advocating for alliances at any cost or with any participants. Allies that undermine our holding of moral high ground are too costly to the effort and should be left out of the alliance. It will only be by incorporating alliance members with impeccable, unblemished character, especially in regards to the three great temptations of sex, money, and power, that the alliance will succeed. 2, reach and mobilize our potential allies. The Bible-believing Christian who's sitting in the back of the church, listening to the Trinitarian preacher and going, that's not right. They're on our side of the fight, but they don't know yet where the lines are. They haven't recognized their duty yet to their side of the fight for truth. We have to reach them next. We need to win battles to earn credibility. Losing causes draw no allies. We have to sally forth and win in the public dialogue on as many fronts and with as much force as we can muster. And that means everything from our individual conversations to our social media presence, to debates that we engage in, to publications that we have. We have to do it well, professionally. We have to be a source of victories that people can see and say, I want to be a part of that. We need to incorporate and empower, this is, I think, a focus for this weekend, and empower new allies in the larger strategic picture, which means shifting leadership responsibility out away from the center, decentralizing to empower leaders on the ground. The UCA board doesn't want to be in control of the Unitarian movement. We want to see it grow way beyond us. So finding the people that are ready to dive in and be a part of that is one of our goals this weekend. Please reach out to us as you find yourself with a mission in your heart. As our strength grows, we're going to have to find opportunities for major offensive, targeting where the enemy is weak. Here's some suggestions from me. It could include challenging church statements of faith, college admission requirements, training and replacing Unitarian pastors and professors in leadership positions. The more that we can give ourselves opportunity to make a real difference that people can see and feel, the more it'll actually draw people to the alliance. Ultimately, though, it'll be the enormous power of our Americans and Russians coming to the aid of us in the UK, metaphorically, the body of Christ itself, who properly awakened, properly equipped, and properly motivated will lead us to ultimate victory. I like this quote from Winston Churchill. He's full of them. The truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it, ignorance may deride it, but in the end, there it is. That's our greatest strength. So what does winning look like? I say, God willing, we're starting Reformation 2.0. And God willing, that Reformation ought not fail to impact every single human being on the planet, starting with every Christian. But we stand today where the Allies did in the spring of 1940, not at the end of the war with a new mandate to rebuild the war-ravaged Europe, or for us to participate in a new Christian era. We're at the beginning, needing to figure out what works and what winning a little at a time looks like. So here's some measures that are objective that I suggest we could use. First, we should be measuring by polling data what other Christians think about Unitarianism. We should be able to see if we're moving the bar at all. Are we having an impact? I think we should be identifying if we're seeing changes to church and college statements of faith, removing Trinitarianism as a requirement for membership and admission. I think we should be looking for measurable growth of current Unitarian churches and the planting of new ones, flipping of Trinitarian denominations, churches, and ministries to Unitarian theology. Look, this is going to be like divisions within denominations. There are going to be subgroups that decide they want Unitarianism, and they're going to bring it up at the Southern Baptist Convention one day, and they're going to divide over it. And for that, we're sad, but for the advance of truth, we can be happy. We want to see increases in Unitarian Christian works, that means books, articles, that are accepted by publishers, and not just our own, but the world more broadly. We could see increases in number of trained and installed Unitarian pastors, and increase in trained Unitarian PhDs, which hopefully we'll talk more about later this weekend. Ultimately, the objective of the Alliance is nothing less than all of Christianity holding a Unitarian theology. We need to change the entire arc of history. Why? Because we either hold a falsehood, and it couldn't matter any less, or We hold something so significant, a truth that's so significant, that the entire world is in need of hearing it. If we're right, and the Christian church has gone astray on the very identity of the God it worships, and the Lord it's allegiant to, how significant is that in the scope of human history? If we're right, how great is our responsibility as possessors of this corrective truth?